Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Wound Ostomy and Continence Stars Legacy Series, which we are putting on in order to honor NSWOC Week, which runs from April 17th to the 21st. And we would like to take the opportunity to thank all of the NSWOCs who are listening in this evening for your leadership in wound ostomy and continence. And we'd like to thank everyone for participating. And I want you to be prepared to be inspired. We will go through the interview and we'll encourage you to put any questions you may have in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. At the end of the interview, Diane will take some questions and we'll be very happy to answer them. And so we have a very special guest this evening to interview, who is Dr. Diane Krasner, an individual who has made a major impact on wound care internationally. And Diane is with us live from her home in York, Pennsylvania. Good evening, Diane.
Hello, Kathy. Thank you for having me this evening.
Yeah, we're really honored to have you. And, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is, who is Diane Krasner and how has she made such an impact in wound care? And so I did a little bit of background research, Diane. I hope you don't mind. And I'd like everybody who's listening this evening to get to kind of know who you are. So the first thing is that you are a board certified wound specialist with over 35 years of experience in wound ostomy and continence across the continuum of care. And you're a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing and a master of the American Professional Wound Care Association. You're also a wound and skin care consultant and an expert witness, and a part-time adjunct clinical faculty member for the Harrisburg Area Community College in the York Campus Nursing Program. Now, I was really interested to see that you're now the senior advisor for what's known as CARS, the Coalition for At-Risk Skin. You're also a recipient of the John Boswick Award for Outstanding Lifetime Achievement in Wound Healing, and for your not just your achievements in wound healing, but your tireless work. And all of this work has made major contributions to advance the field of wound care. Now, I found this really interesting. When I was looking at your educational background, I see that you graduated from the Johns Hopkins University with a BA honors in ancient Near Eastern studies with a master's in Egyptology. Like, what inspired you to get into nursing after having a master's in Egyptology?
Well, my father was a frustrated archaeologist, and he encouraged me to get interested in archaeology. And so I started my studies at Hopkins, and I was 7 years in to what would have been 10 to 12 years. And I saw people ahead of me that were finishing and they weren't getting jobs. There were no jobs for Egyptologists, especially American women, Jewish Egyptologists, because the world was changing. This was in the 70s. And I thought, you know, this is crazy. I'm never going to get a job. So I just woke up one day and said, I think I'll be a nurse because you can always get a job as a nurse. And I thought it would be easy and it would be quick. Well, I was wrong about the last two, but you can always get a job as a nurse. So I had to go back. I had never studied any science. So I had to go back and do basic sciences, and I loved it. It was the best decision I ever made. But I did learn how to write at Hopkins in the humanities, and that then came in very handy as I began to publish and edit books and do those kind of things. So all that tuition my parents paid wasn't a complete waste.
Yeah, and you know, when you were talking about writing, one thing that has really inspired me are all the textbooks that you've written. And I have a copy here. I don't know if you can see it very well on the screen, but it's Chronic Wound Care, a clinical source book for healthcare professionals. And you wrote me a message on the inside of this textbook, and it was dated April the 20th, 1998.
Wow. Wow.
So,
An anniversary.
anniversary. And I think, you know, I've known you for over 25 years, and I still have this book on my shelf. And I see that you were the editor of this chronic wound care book, and you and Leah Van Rieswick were editors on the 2018 ebook edition, Chronic Wound Care. And you have written other articles and done other research. So your writing has been extensive, and you've really impacted education through your writing. Is that one of the areas of wound care that you really took to because of this background that you had at Johns Hopkins?
Yeah, I think that I'd always I always thought of myself as becoming a teacher of something. And then after I did my nursing program at University of Maryland, it became very clear that I wanted to do some kind of education. And I went back and got my master's in adult and continuing education in the evening school at Hopkins. And that was probably the most useful and empowering degree of all the education I got, because I really got tools to well, we used transparencies in those days, so we've come a long way technologically, but still the principles of adult and continuing education are pretty much the same.
Right. In addition to your writing, I also noticed that you've served on numerous editorial boards, and you've been on boards of Wound Prevention and Management and Wounds and Wound Source, and that's pretty impressive. And you also have a strong research focus in wound pain, palliative wound care, and safe negative pressure wound therapy, and legal issues related to wound care. And of course, as I mentioned before, you have numerous publications in the wound care literature nationally and internationally, which is impressive. So, you know, when you get to see a bit about who Diane Krasner is, like, we're inspired. But what I'd like to do now is kind of back up and really understand what fueled Diane Krasner to get into where you are today. And so I would like to start at the beginning. And could you just tell us where you grew up?
So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. My father worked at NASA. He was a mechanical engineer. My mother was a housewife. And so, ironically, all these incredible things about ET nursing were happening in my town when I was a young girl, with Norma Gill and Rupert Turnbull and the start of the first ET program. But we weren't connected to anything healthcare. So I didn't find out about all that until 25 years later, when I went to ET school.
Oh, wow. And where was that?
That was at Harrisburg Hospital program. And I finished that in 1985. And I was actually in the first class that had wound care in its curriculum, because before 1985, it was just ostomy. So we got a week of wound, and that really piqued my interest. And I've been passionate about the topic ever since.
That's very interesting. So when you were growing up, what do you remember about stories that your mother and father told you about their childhood that maybe impacted you? What stories did they tell you?
Well, you know, it's an interesting question, because my parents didn't tell me a lot of stories about their childhood, and my grandparents never talked about their childhood either. And all four of my grandparents were immigrants, and they left Europe under bad circumstances as Jewish immigrants to this country, to the United States. And I think they were just bad memories, and they didn't ever talk about the old country because it wasn't good stuff. And so my parents also rarely reflected on their childhood experiences. And so it was only, later that there were influences when I was a teenager that maybe impacted my choice of nursing. Do you hear some squawking in the background? If you
A little
do,
bit, not too bad.
that's my parrot, Chestnut, joining in the conversation.
Okay. Well, he's very welcome. So, I mean, look at all you've accomplished. I'm sure your parents were very, very proud of you, but were you encouraged to give time or talent or things to make the world a better place?
Yeah, for sure. My mother did a lot of volunteer work, and she encouraged me to volunteer. And my very first volunteer job was with the Red Cross,
Mhm.
helping to copy books for the blind. And then I also, in high school, it was my first exposure to healthcare. I volunteered at a rehab facility for elderly patients in the occupational therapy department. So I think that certainly impacted me later when I chose to leave Egyptology and find something practical to do. I think I gravitated to nursing because I would get fulfillment from that. The other thing that it's silly, but I really what's the best skill that my mother gave me when I was young. She would pick me up and put me on the counter so that I could reach the cereal shelf in the kitchen and alphabetize all the cereals when they got out of alphabetical order, because she was pretty organized. And so she taught me to be organized. And as all WOC nurses know, keeping all those supplies and information and everything, organization's like critical to being a successful nurse and certainly a successful WOC nurse. So I'm very thankful for those organizational skills that I got when I was young.
Yeah. And so you just mentioned about the fact that you were getting fulfillment out of going into nursing. What personal values do you feel have guided you in order to make an impact in wound care?
So, I think that I was blessed to find something that I could be passionate about. And for me, it's not work when I do things related to our specialty. So I love Mary Engelbreit, the US illustrator. She does cards and books and things. And she has a picture that with a quote that summarizes it all for me. Work hard, be kind, that's all. And I've got it copied and posted in all kinds of places because that's kind of my mantra and what I try to do. Work hard, be kind, and that's it. If I can do that and keep up my passion for what I do, then it fuels me.
Wow. So with your mantra, work hard, be kind, that's all. There must have been mentors that beyond this individual you just mentioned in your life who helped to prepare you for the role that you had in wound care. Who were your mentors and how did they help prepare you for leaving a legacy? And if you could also talk about, in addition to the mentors, the mentees that you had and how you connected with them.
So my my career kind of has had these different phases. So, early on when I was a young clinician, I had role models that I looked to wound nurses in wound ostomy continence nurses in Baltimore. Sue Currents and Cece Rund were my role models. And I looked up to Yvonne Fowler, who started the SAWC symposium here in the United States. But my real mentors came later, after I had been working for a while. And there's an interesting thread when I talk about these people, that I met them through either conferences or industry, or kind of random sort of ways that one might not expect. But the first two people I met who became mentors to me were George Rodeheaver from the University of Virginia and Louise Colburn, a nurse who worked for Gaymar Industries as their director of educational programming. And the Soft Care Mattress was doing conferences across the United States. And I got invited as a young clinician to go to one of their conferences, and they flew me there. I remember I was so excited about being flown to this conference and put up in a hotel. And they had a little wine and cheese reception the night before. And there I met these two individuals, George and Louise, who became very, very inspirational for me and mentored me for the next, I don't know, decade. And to this day, George and I talk frequently. He gave me my first opportunity to be part of a national organization. He was president of NPUAP at the time. And so I got on the board of the NPUAP and had my first exposure, to a national influential organization. And Louise helped me with my presentation skills and gave me opportunities to present through Gaymar. And then she went to work for J&J, and I got to do some presentations through J&J. So they were really important in my early career. Then I decided to go back and get my Ph.D. and get my master's in nursing along the way. And my dissertation chair was Dr. Ann Belcher, who is a researcher and author in the cancer field. And she had a powerful influence on my research development, but she was a practical researcher. She was like I wanted to be. She was a translator, taking research and translating it into practice. And so her mentorship was really important in my development as a scholar. And then I went on to do a postdoc at Johns Hopkins School of Nursing, and my postdoc advisor, Martha Hill, who at the time was president of the American Heart Association, the first woman nurse president of the American Heart Association. So I got to watch her leadership with a national organization. And so all of those experiences, had a huge influence as I watched my mentors. Then, in the third part of my career, about 18 years ago, I decided to jump into legal nurse consulting and become an expert witness. Litigation is rampant in the United States, and there are so many pressure injury lawsuits. And so I went to my first meeting of the American Association of Legal Nurse Consultants and met Pat Iyer, who has mentored me as a LNC. And Pat wrote the core curriculum, the first core curriculum for the AALNC. She was the first editor of their journal. She ran a LNC consulting business, and to this day continues to educate and train LNCs across the United States. So she's been a great mentor for me as I took on this latest role, where I'm also totally passionate about this work. And I do primarily defense work, helping to defend our colleagues, nurses in this country, licensed practical nurses, certified nursing assistants who get now named in lawsuits involving mostly pressure injuries is what I do. Yeah.
Wow.
So those have been the most significant people who've mentored me. And then I've been fortunate to have a few mentees. One of them, I know most of you listening probably know, Kevin Wu. So Kevin and I met when we started the IIWCC course, and we both had an interest in wound pain, and he jumped off my work on wound pain and did his dissertation work on wound pain. And we continue to be involved in various projects together. And he's one of the Canadian members of the Coalition for At-Risk Skin that I'm involved in. So then Cathy Milne, who I met first on advisory panels, serving on advisory panels with her, and we've done various projects together over the last decade. And Cathy's now the co-chair of the Coalition for At-Risk Skin CARS. And we do various projects together, and we've become co-mentors. She started as a mentee, but we are co-mentors now. And then last, an old colleague, Cindy Sylvia, who was the facilitator for the SCALE document, Skin Changes at Life's End, that I co-chaired with Dr. Sibbald. And the facilitator of that was Cindy Sylvia, who worked for GAMAR at the time, that sponsored our SCALE work. And so Cindy and I have been friends. Well, we're in the same region of the WOCN, so we've known each other for 40 years. But she has decided to start doing expert work now. So I've been mentoring her, and she's taken on her first few cases, and it's a joy to interact with her. She also went on and got her PhD over in Cardiff, in her master's in wound healing and her PhD in nursing in Cardiff.
Oh, interesting. Well, I like the way that you described moving from being mentees to co-mentors. That it sounds very collaborative, and I think that that's a really nice message that you put across. So another part of leaving a legacy in nursing is sharing skills. What skills do you have that you would like to pass on to the next generation of nurses?
Well, I think my best skill is this translator skill. When I applied to my master's PhD program, the faculty member who was interviewing me said, "Well, what do you want to do when you finish your PhD?" And I said, "Well, I want to be a translator." And she said, "Well, there are no jobs in nursing for a translator." And I didn't have a good answer at that point because I didn't know enough. But now I understand that there are people who want to do the research, but it's equally important that there are people who can read and understand research and then translate it to bedside practice. And you can have the best research in the world, and if it doesn't get used, it's no good. So the real skill is translating that information and disseminating it and developing tools and enablers that put it into practice. So I think, that's been a theme throughout my writing career, that I've been developing these patient tools. I just published one last year, guide to patients, families, and caregivers on skin changes at life's end. So, you know, these are important things that we all need to be doing as wound specialists, nurses, wound ostomy continence nurses, because we have this body of knowledge that we have to be able to impart to our patients and their caregivers. And there's a skill to it. It just doesn't happen. And it often gets short shrift these days in our fast-paced healthcare system where no one has time for that. But certainly written tools are very useful and empowering for patients.
Right. Thank you. Well, we know in nursing that sometimes things can go really, really well, and other times there can be tremendous challenges that come and really challenge us to be able to think differently, behave differently. What has your biggest professional challenge been, and how did you navigate it?
Well, so to be really honest about this, early in my career, I just couldn't find a place where I fit. And I jumped around from one hospital to another, spent a year at one, 2 years in another, and just didn't find a place where I felt fulfilled and appreciated. And I don't know, it just didn't seem like this was what I wanted to be doing. I mean, I loved the work, but I didn't find the support I think that I was looking for in any of those organizations. So then I finally gave up and went back to school. And then I moved to York. I met a guy on the internet, got married, and moved up to York and got a job in a nursing home. And it was just a wonderful, supportive environment. And I liked the pace of it. I liked the continuity of care with the patients and their families. So it was better. But really, it was when I went into my own business as a legal nurse consultant that I really found my niche and felt like I'd finally found a work environment that made the most of my skill set and that I could live with. Mm-hmm. So I've been, doing that. I've been self-employed for 16 years now. And I love being my own boss.
Yeah, no, it's it's interesting, and I'm really glad that you have found an area that you have a passion in. Like I look at you and all of the things you've done in wound care, and I think, wow, it's not just one thing about Diane Krasner, it's many things that you've done to impact wound care. And I see that your knowledge and your experience in wound care has set a high standard for nursing. How do you think that you have shared this high standard of nursing with other healthcare professionals?
Well, I think the most powerful thing is the pen and writing articles. Initially I was doing case studies and sharing thoughts on my clinical experience. Now I'm involved in these big group projects that are consensus statements, like the 21 consensus statements on at-risk skin that the CARS group just did. It took us 1.5 years to write that document. And it was a big group project, 9 people. But I think those are the ways to impact standards of practice.
And so you mentioned the CARS group and I did mention it, the Coalition for At-Risk Skin. Could you just tell us a little bit about that group, how it came to be, and where is it going?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little preview, and then I will be talking a little bit more about it at the ISTAP Skin Tear Day, and then in June I'm going to be doing a NSWOC webinar about our consensus document. But we were a group of 9 people that were serving on Medline's Post-Acute Care Advisory Board. And we heard some data that Medline presented about the use of moisturizers and skin barriers, the underutilization of those products that concerned us. And so we got together, this group of 9, mostly nurses, a physical therapist, and started exploring the whole issue of at-risk skin and what we were doing as a group to impact that. And we were very much influenced by the work of ISTAP on skin tears. And so ultimately we wrote and published this consensus document with recommendations for moisturization. And in the future, we're working on, we're going to do a similar document for skin barriers. And we're in the process of right now of developing enablers and tools to support our first consensus document. And it is available. You can download it, or you can reach out to me or go on my website, and the link is there for getting that consensus document.
Okay, and what is the URL for your website, Diane?
It is www.dianelkrasner.com. And there's a resources page, and there's lots of stuff there that you can download, as well as the link for the CARS document.
Okay. And so how important is it for you to leave a legacy in wound care for future generations of nurses? Like, is this an important area for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't really think of it that way, but I want to tell you the story about how I met Norma Gill and how we ended up writing the Norma Gill Festschrift, because I think for wound ostomy continence nursing, that is certainly my most important legacy. So in 1986, when I went to my very first IAET conference, it was the International Association for Enterostomal Therapy in those days. And it was in Las Vegas at Caesars. And they used to have these big lunches for everybody who was all the nurses who were at the conference were invited to one big sit-down lunch. So I was standing in line to get into that lunch, and someone said, "Oh, look up there, that's Norma Gill." And of course, I had just finished my ET program, and it was like meeting Florence Nightingale for me. I was just in awe. So I went up to this woman and I introduced myself, and I said, "I'm so honored to meet you, and I've just finished a program." What I didn't know was that Norma loved brand new ETs, that was her thing. So she put her arm around me and she said, "Honey, come and sit next to me at lunch." And so I did. I sat next to her, and that began our long friendship. And about 10 years after that, Norma got this idea in her head that she wanted me and Paula Irwin Toth to help her write her autobiography. She said she had boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff in her garage. Now I can understand, because I have boxes and boxes of stuff in my basement. So, and she wanted us to come and go through all that stuff and write her help her write her autobiography. Paula at the time was the director of the program at the Cleveland Clinic, Norma's Legacy. And Paula, for those of you who might not know her story, was one of Norma's kids. Paula was born with bladder exstrophy and was one of the early children to have urostomy surgery. And Norma was her ET nurse. So she actually studied classics in college. So she had gotten writing skills too, and then became a nurse and then became an ET nurse. So both of us were well positioned to do this project. And I proposed that instead of writing Norma's autobiography, that we do a Festschrift, which is very common in academia, in the humanities, a book in honor of somebody who's either retiring or senior, written by people who were involved in their careers. And so what Paula and I did, with Norma's help, she participated in all this. We scattered out all the people who were still around who had worked with her in the early days. And they all wrote up their stories. They wrote chapters about the early days of ET nursing, working with Norma, working with Dr. Turnbull. Dr. Turnbull, unfortunately, had died by that point, but his son and daughter-in-law, his son was a Convatec rep and his daughter-in-law was an ET, and they wrote a chapter about Dr. Turnbull. So we were able to publish that book, which captured, very timely the history of our specialty. And we gave a leather-bound copy to Norma in a presentation on her 75th birthday. And I always say it was like the nicest thing I ever did in my whole life. But it certainly was important as a legacy for our specialty. And it is now available to purchase as a download from the WCET. Mm-hmm. And they published the last two editions, and a commemorative edition that came out last year. I think there are some hard copies left too, but you can also just go on the WCET website and download that book if you're interested in reading the history of how wound ostomy continence nursing, ET nursing started. And it's very inspirational. So that's the thing in my career that I'm most proud of.
Well, thank you for sharing the story about Norma Gill. Very interesting. So glad that you were able to write that book. I know I had a copy that I got when I was at the WOCN conference in Fort Worth, Texas last June. It's absolutely excellent. So thank you for being one of the drivers in order to get that book published. And so there are a lot of words of wisdom that have been woven throughout this conversation. It's been really interesting to kind of learn more about your career path. And as we are coming towards the end of this interview, I want to just let people know again, if you would like to write a comment to Diane, ask a question, please put it down in the Q&A box. This is your opportunity to ask a question. And we'd really like to hear from all of you. But the last thing I would like to ask you, Diane, is for any last words of wisdom that you could leave with the people who are participating this evening.
I think I'd like to share one of my favorite quotes with you. And this is from Louis Pasteur. And they said that he had this written over his bench in his research lab, probably not in English, but chance favors the prepared mind. So, I think that all of us who are NSWOCs, WOC nurses, ET nurses have to commit to lifelong learning. And we have to be prepared for changes that come about, you know, be they COVID or whatever, that change our world. But that's an exciting thing about being in our specialty, because it's never the same. And if you're bored, that's your problem, not the problem of the specialty, because there's so much to do. And, you know, if anyone said to me 20 years ago that I'd be doing and loving doing expert legal work, I'd say, oh, you're crazy. But, you know, there are so many opportunities. And that's just the most exciting thing. And I'm just so grateful that I decided that I saw those role models early in my career and said, you know, someday I want to be like that. And so many people helped me to get to the point where I am today. And I'm just always grateful for that.
Right. Well, I can really see that you have committed to lifelong learning, and you've definitely been prepared for changes along the way. And of course, weathered through the pandemic and many other changes in your life. And you really strike me as a person that wasn't afraid to make changes when you didn't feel you were in the right place at the right time in your career. And so I also love the way that you described applying what you had taken from the early education in Egyptology and how you work that experience to really help you find your place in nursing, and how it going to Johns Hopkins helped you learn how to write. I think that's really important to be able to draw on all the different experiences and skills and education that you get throughout your career. So that was quite interesting. For the people who are participating online, do you have any last questions? I see a couple of comments in the chat. One of them's lovely professional story. And I can relate to what she said about finding her place within her profession. It can take years to find your belonging, and some nurses never find that place. You know, what did you think when I read that comment?
Yeah, you know, it's true that, you know, some people just stay stuck and unhappy. And there just are so many opportunities in nursing, different settings, different roles, that, and it, you know, unlike some other professions where people don't change often, at least in the United States. I don't know if it's the same way in Canada, but nobody's surprised when a nurse works at one place for a year or two and then moves on to another place and moves on to another place. I mean, that's kind of standard around here. So there was really no reason to stay stuck in an unhappy place when there are just so many opportunities in nursing. And if you don't like practice, you can do education or administration or legal or whatever. It's just change your specialty. You know, I mean, I found wound. I would not be happy doing ostomy all the time, you know, and I only know continence from incontinence skin management, but, you know, I was very happy to subspecialized. And I stay in my lane when I do my expert work. I only do wound expert work. And if a case comes that's ostomy, I refer it to one of my colleagues who's an ostomy legal expert.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that have come in. The first question, this is a good one, and this I'm sure you can draw on your long-term care experience. I just want to know how I can serve as a skin wellness associate nurse, which are called SWANs in Canada, to the best of my ability as a licensed practical nurse. I am having a hard time knowing how to do this. What do you recommend? So she wants to know, so in Canada, we have an educational program for licensed practical nurses and registered practical nurses, which is a skin wellness program that covers the 3 domains of wound, ostomy, and continence. How can this individual serve in this role?
Well, it's a really, really good question, Paula. And I would say that there are similar conundrums here in the United States for LPNs who are taking on wound, ostomy, continence roles, especially in long-term care in this country. They do the wound, ostomy, continence care in long-term care, and we don't support those people enough here in the US either. And maybe there's a real opportunity, Cathy, for our organizations to help define the roles of the whole team, nurse aides as well. And it is very important, especially in this country where there's so much litigation, and that LPNs, nurse aides know their boundaries and know when there's things they shouldn't do, even though systems are asking them to practice way beyond the scope of their practice. And they do it well, but the organizations need to be the voice for those people, and help them understand what their role is as part of the team. I mean, we're all part of a team and we all have our roles to play. And maybe we need to more carefully define those, both in the US and Canada. And I don't think they're that different, but I'm not totally sure. But so as an individual person, find a mentor, find somebody who can guide you either at your facility or in your community to help you define your role and know where you can have the biggest impact. So I see a familiar name there, Nancy Parslow, who I haven't thought about in years.
Yeah. And yeah, she wrote a nice comment. I wanted to mention to Paula as well that we just finished a role description for the SWAN role. It's being laid out now and will be launched at the NSWOC National Conference. So we'll make sure that you get a copy of that. And I really think that that will help take a step forward in defining the role for the skin wellness associate nurse in whatever care setting they're working in. We also have a question here from Corey Hirschap. With so many areas of wound care yet to explore and research, how do you decide where you spend your time and what you focus on? So you've got all these different areas of wound care to explore and research to do. So how do you decide what you're going to focus on?
Well, one thing has kind of led to another. So I got interested in wound pain for my dissertation work because I had a painful dehisced wound after my own surgery. And then I realized when I was a patient how painful some of these wounds can be, and that propelled me into wound pain. And it was actually Gary Sibbald then who introduced me to Frank Ferris from Mount Sinai in Toronto. And he's a palliative physician, and I began getting interested in end of life palliative wound care. And then from that kind of morphed into the legal work, where the vast majority of the cases that I review are end-of-life pressure injuries that are unavoidable, not anybody's fault, but just come with the dying process, or multi-organ system failure, or critical illness. So there's this thread that's been linking all those areas of interest, and I've just gotten smaller and smaller and smaller in my worldview.
Okay. So we don't have any other questions that have come in. Your words of wisdom, your inspiration, your commitment to nursing, your commitment to the tri-specialty of wound, ostomy, and continence, even though you do focus in wound care, you understand it and how they fit together, how the tri-specialty works. Diane, you've made a tremendous impact in wound care, and we really thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend this time and let us get to know you better. I'm always inspired when I talk to you. I really can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom, and do hope that you continue to share your passion for wound care for many years to come. And I would like to thank everyone who participated this evening. I hope that you have something you can take away that will inspire you to look at your own career and think about how you are working to leave a legacy in your own situation. And so we do have another interview tomorrow at noon. It's Dr. Kim LeBlanc who will be interviewing Nicole Denis on leaving a legacy in wound education. And so we hope you can join us then. And then tomorrow evening, we have a mother and daughter legacy, an NSWOC who retired, and her daughter took over her pediatric practice. So we're looking forward to that as well. And so for now, I'd like to say good night to everyone. Work hard, be kind. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy.
Thank you, Diane.